threw a leg across that iron horse and pulled the throttle down. A million things rushing through his mind like that rumbling sound. Living life in his own eyes, direction isn't clear. So searching all these years.
Good evening and welcome to Answers from Mars Hill. This is Pastor Ski of the Rushing Wind Biker Church in Holbrook, New York. New York State Elder for Bikers for Christ Motorcycle Ministry. And today I'm going to have a continuation of what we were talking about last week about, you look around the world and you see a lot of suffering, you see a lot of wars, sickness, disease, things that are going on all over the world, the prejudice, even in our country, the tensions between races, and different thoughts, and we've been talking about this question about how can God be good if there isn't much good looking around in the world today. And so I mentioned last week that my particular story, I found a lot of peace, a lot of comfort. And really, in the challenges I've gone through my whole life, I've been able to see that God is still very good, that He can be trusted. I mentioned last week, starting the story of the progress of humanity breaking down from what it was ultimately supposed to be when, as a Christian, we believe God created heavens and the earth and everything that's here. And the one decision we made that kind of changed the course of everything and brought us into a state of just so much bad, so much evil, bad decisions compounded by bad decisions over generations and over generations. And we basically have compromised and corrupted our own environment, our own humanity, the way we live with each other, cultures, community, and even in our own mind, the darkness and the emotions that have been introduced to humanity over the millennia, whether it's despair, whether it's hate, anger, anxiety. And I want to expand a little bit on something I touched on last week with this question of, can God be good in a bad and evil and suffering world? I touched a little bit on the alternatives. Christianity and this faith that I have given myself to is really the only faith that this question actually has some kind of valid question, because we believe that God is a good God. We believe that God is love. He created everything to be good. And so I talked a little bit last week about the non-God viewpoint of this question. And how do we justify, how do we understand all the bad, evil, and suffering in this world? And how do we process that if there is not a God? And so for a couple of minutes, I want to really put together maybe a little intense conversation based on some things in my life, and looking at it through the lens of, if there were no God, what would the reality be with things that are going on? And again, I'm going to maybe use my life as part of the reasoning. See, if you don't believe in God, you're left with really a humanistic view of the world. Evolution, the Big Bang Theory, being random, survival of the fittest, and all the ramifications that come along with that. And if you've chosen this particular philosophy, this particular mindset, you're forced to have a different filter of what is good, what is evil, what is the ultimate good, and what is working towards that end of the ultimate good. If you believe in evolution, then you must know that we must still be evolving, that there's an ultimate higher end that we haven't currently experienced. Even in our place in the universe, we're far from being the perfect ultimate specimen, according to the atheist and humanist worldview. And so all things that work towards that ultimate end would be considered good. I mentioned last week that I had 3 siblings that died within a week of their childbirth, apparent birth defects or some abnormality. And in this worldview, the death of my siblings would actually be good as viewed as a good thing. The cleansing of the gene pool, working towards even a more perfect humanity. In the perfect mindset of an atheist worldview, although a bit painful, it would have actually been a good thing. Now my sister, who has been disabled for some 43 years now, that actually would have been, or is still, from an atheist worldview, a bad thing. You know, from an atheist ultimate worldview of evolution, its ramifications, her living so long was really, in a sense, a complication of the evolutionary process, an unnecessary burden inhibiting the perfecting of the gene pool, with any chance of propagating, continuing, of the detriment to the evolutionary process or slowing it down. So when you look at it through the lens of a purely atheistic or humanistic worldview, her being sustained for 43 years now in what might be considered a deficient human experience in a purely humanistic and atheist worldview is bad. It's been a burden to the process. And on top of that, when we think about the dark emotions, the loss, the pain we feel, it's really a corruption and an unnecessary bad side effect of the ultimate bad that's occurred, for it gives us emotions that are kind of detrimental to the sustaining of our sacred evolutionary cycle. You know, mourning, sorrow, feeling loss in their viewpoint, and really the perfection of what the atheist viewpoint is really an unnecessary hindrance to moving forward and moving into the perfecting of our species. So really, we're left with a really complication or a complicated question in our life. What is good and what is actually bad? You know, in the theory of evolution, they actually have a faith that believes the Earth is millions and millions of years old. 99.9% of all species that have walked, have crawled, have swam, or flied are now extinct. That worldview believes that there were, I believe, 5 major extinction events, each one killing off the species, and extinction in general is what allowed new species to dominate the globe for a time. So in an evolutionary view of life, death and extinction have been responsible for the appearance of mankind. So actually we should be, in a way, thankful for death. Death of the least fit, reproduction of the most fit. So kind of ironically, in a sick twist of fate, if you will, people like Hitler, Shockley, had, in essence, altruistic goals, although they were misguided. You know, another irony of fate befell Stephen Hawking. He developed Lou Gehrig's disease when he was 21 years old. It turned him into an invalid for the rest of his life. Now, by evolutionary standards and a humanist world order, he should have been left to die for the furthering of the programmed survival of the fittest. You know, Stephen Hawking should have been left just to let fate take its course and not kept alive for the purging of an impurity in our humanity. Yet inexplicably, he had an intelligence, the ability to investigate. He had an imaginative instinct. He moved science in many ways forward and helped with mankind becoming more intelligent in many ways. And so Hawking's life was really a living contradiction and complication to the theory he actually led his life by. You know, evolutionists followers of the old Earth theory, if they live out their true conviction in their faith and their science of randomness, then they shouldn't have extended this man's life. And just like Ebenezer Scrooge said in that Dickens novel, decrease the surplus population. But as we all know, Hawkins had a powerful call in his life, a powerful purpose in his life. And his physical disabilities and genetic inferiority actually empowered him to use the God-given gifts he inexplicably had to better enhance the human condition and the human experience. My sister, as I've mentioned last week, I've seen really an extraordinary purpose in her life. I've seen just people being around her, being brought to a place of compassion and caring, and actually an understanding and awareness of how God works in hard circumstances. You know, sometimes we need something to bring our emotions and our compassion and our sense of mercy to the forefront, so we can start looking at really the reality of what goes on. Is God good? How do these things work in our life in a clearer view? And so when we come back from the first commercial break, I want to talk about a little more about the atheist worldview, the Big Bang Theory, how these things and random things, looking at it from this question of could God be good or God is not good, the question being irrelevant to someone who doesn't believe in God, really how that plays out, and really how it's really a dark state of an understanding of the future, understanding of what goes on now. And so after we come back from this commercial break, I want to go a little deeper into this conversation, and then in a little while start talking about the progression within the Christian faith of how we got to where we are today from that first act that really brought us into this dark realm.
Welcome to Wolfman's Bike Alert. I'm Kenny the Wolfman Max, and right now I'm going to bring you a brand new jacket in for the ladies. An embroidered jacket. This hasn't been out yet. This is the first time. The Flying Angel and the ever popular Brando jacket. It's been around for 100 years and will be around for 100 more. I've got hundreds and hundreds in stock. Don't forget our large selection of sunglasses. I've got all types of jewelry, ladies biker jewelry, silver rings, hundreds of men's rings. We've got it all. Everything is here, right here. Wolfman's Bike Alert. 335 Smithtown Boulevard in Ronkonkoma. My phone number is 631-578-7877. 631-578-7877. Friday night again.
Hey everybody, this is Motorcycle Mike, the personal injury lawyer. In addition to representing injured motorcyclists for over 30 years now, during that same time, I've represented countless car crash victims and construction workers injured on construction sites. If you need my assistance, go to my website, motorcyclemikeesq.com. I will always be there for you.
Welcome back to the show, and I want to continue for a moment talking about the situation with my sister, because this was one occurrence that happened in my life where if I could hold something against God, shake my fist at God for what happened to my sister at 4 years old, and say, well, God can't possibly be good because of what happened to my sister. I would have, every excuse to feel that way. But as I mentioned before the break, I've seen in my sister's life, because of the people that have been drawn to her situation, that have been drawn to her either through being caretakers, through people from faith arenas to come and pray for her, and how my mom used to care for her. The scene itself really brought an understanding of how God works in some of these hard situations to think through and process when we're going through this life, particularly with people we care about, people that we love. And when I really started to see how God, from my Christian perspective, and how we view the purpose of life, how I saw a purpose in my sister's life, and even within her disability, that kind of transcended what a quote-unquote normal, healthy human being could possibly accomplish. And then I started to look at my sister, and she's 40, maybe 46 years old now, and I look at the life she's had, the life she's going to have. She's never going to have a man break her heart. She's never going to have to worry about where her next meal comes from, discrimination, violence. She's cared for 24/7. She doesn't have a care in the world. And you start to think, who's the disabled one in this picture? Because when I look at the life my sister is living, I don't know what she's aware of consciously, but I know she smiles and she laughs. She's got no cares in the world. And then you look at your own life and see how much of a struggle it is to live this life. Who actually has a better life? We have some things that we look at that are fun and enjoyable, and because we have all our faculties and our facilities, we also have to deal with the brokenness, the darkness, the people that befriend you, people that stab you in the back, the things we see, the things we experience. And so you start to get a different view of life when you start to see how God kind of reestablishes what is a good life, what purpose is all about, and actually how He can work through some of the most challenging situations. And we can have an understanding and actually be at peace in a world that looks kind of randomly evil and tragic, but then kind of look in a different viewpoint and see that there is good in things that seem very bad. And I want to go back for a minute or two about people who hold an atheist worldview, and how they believe in these random processes, systems like evolution, the random Big Bang theory, the old Earth theory. And this old Earth theory is kind of in the underbelly of what they choose to believe also. At best, the people we want to care about, they can amount to no more than a laboratory animal, expendable for the furthering of the knowledge of the human experience. And we look at situations like my sister and people that are quote-unquote genetically deficient. How could the lengthening of a genetically deficient life be beneficial or part of the furthering of the evolutionary process? Just by the sheer chance of holding our sanity and not living in a life of continued grief, pain, and sorrow. You have to strive for a non-emotional life of accepting the human condition without prejudice, without emotions, which kind of is similar to the Buddhist philosophy. And so, from my perspective, just as a seeker, I believe a better choice for the sheer reality and the healthy processing of pain, suffering and loss, heartbreak and grieving, there has to be a better hope. A hope that includes but doesn't discount the wonder, the extraordinary, love, surprise, friendship, adventure, while also being able to process these things that cause pain. sorrow, death, suffering, and many of the other challenges that we have in this life. But also that it has an honest and real lens to look at these things in both good and bad, see the value, have some understanding, and being able to have healing and also hope. And when you look at the big picture from a existential viewpoint, so to speak, it really is only someone outside or something outside of the realm of our human experience looking in that can give us a glimpse of this kind of understanding. But also to have some kind of way to have an intimate knowledge of our life experiences, our pain, our suffering, our joy, what the journey of life is. Really being an outsider, but with the knowledge of an insider. And so, with that statement in mind, I want to kind of start to give an understanding of the Christian worldview, the view from the Christian world, God's Word, and the Bible, and how we can look into the hard things in life, not just the good things in life, and see things from a lens of what is good, changing a perspective. All the things around us that we deem not good, that we deem bad from our human perspective, things that come against us like death and sickness, violence, killing, accidents, injustice, birth defects, as I've been talking about, and even nature against us, creation against us. How did it get this way? How can we understand the reality of God and the validity of His existence, His constant interacting, how He's involved in human affairs, and know that God is not responsible for this, but that He also cries with us more than we do, actually. And I mentioned last week, I believe, that for Him to step in and massively right everything that is wrong, and even most things that are wrong, would be to take back the very thing that we originally received as a gift, free choice. When we were created, we had free choice, and we still have free choice. And I talked about last week that out of the thousands and thousands and thousands of choices that were good choices, we decided we needed to make the bad choice, and brought what we see now tumbling through the millennia into what we see when we look out the window today or we walk out the door. And the thing is, God will not take back that gift. Even if we have indeed turned it into a curse, He's not going to take back the gift He gave us. And the problem that has occurred within the human realm that has brought this darkness is the problem of the human heart. Since every single human has value, has purpose, and has a vision for their life, God's involvement is a one-on-one invitation to bring us back to the humanity that He intended us to be. It was our decision to separate, and now it's our decision to return. And so the breakdown of what got us here, as quick as I can, it all started last week. We chose the one decision, the knowledge of evil. We were lied to, and that's in essence what we got. The result of that one decision brought anger, brought fear, brought shame, brought guilt, sorrow, stress. All the emotional baggage that God wanted to protect us from came rushing into our world. And along with that came death. Death was not a natural part of our world, but it's an intruder, and it's an enemy. It's not something that God ever created to be part of our existence. We were meant to be eternal beings, and down the road one day, when everything plays out how we see it from a Christian perspective, we will step into that eternal realm once again. But God never wanted death, destruction, what we're doing to this planet. He never wanted this to be part of our existence. And so He protected us from it, warned us what would happen, and now we are where we are. And in the Bible, we follow the story and the lineage of one family, one lineage, and the movement of people that originally, sporadically, had a relationship with God or an awareness of God and humanity. Outside of the story of the Bible, the world is just being populated. Nations and societies and cultures are being created. The world is being populated. So the Bible is a story of one family and how God is moving to try to redeem the human experience through that one family to show the rest of the world what could be. And so when we come back from this next break, I want to dive into how that works through the history of the Jewish nation and what God attempted to do right from the beginning. Anyway, we'll see you in a few minutes after a few words from our sponsors.
Hey everybody, this is Motorcycle Mike, the personal injury lawyer. I've been riding motorcycles my entire adult life. During the course of my 30-year career as a lawyer, I've also represented countless injured motorcyclists. If you're one of them, I can be of assistance to you. Go to my website, please, motorcyclemikeesq.com. I'll always be there for you. I'm on your side when you ride.
Hi, my name is Sharon Gillette, and I'm the owner of One Stitch at a Time. I've been doing this since I'm 9 years old, but it became full-time when my husband was diagnosed with cancer several years ago. And I never went back to work because I wanted to take care of him. I feel what makes me stand out is that I care. I take a personal interest in your project. I take the time to find your correct fit and treat you like a friend, not just a customer. So whether it's embroidery, making patches, printing shirts, doing alterations and repairs, or bringing your ideas to life, you can call me at 631-428-1245 or visit my website at www.onestitchatatime.co.
Welcome back. And I wanted to start to give an explanation of the really the gradual breakdown of humanity according to what we see in the scriptures of the Bible and the movement of humanity as outlined in the words of this historic manuscript. We know that this is the story of one people group, and as humanity was starting to propagate over the millennia, over the generations. Obviously, the world was being populated all over with people that aren't mentioned in the Bible, with cultures, nations, civilizations that was spreading all over the globe. And so with this new brokenness that had come into humanity, there was no guiding principles within humanity. Man was growing, and population was growing. And as I mentioned, after that first act of being deceived and gaining that knowledge of evil, it only took one generation for death to come into the human realm. And so, as the world was populated and nations and cultures grew outside of what's actually recorded in the Bible. We have a lot of archaeological information about the types of cultures, the types of civilizations throughout the world through most of the history of mankind. but there really was no guiding principles of life. Morality, immorality. There was no guidelines, nothing to establish what was moral, what was immoral. Humanity was just growing and just propagating and intensifying really the selfish and bad qualities that now were inherent to man. You know, as much archaeological evidences of civilizations all around the world, as well as civilizations that are within the history of what the Bible talks about with the history of cultures and nations. But as far as the rest of the world, and even within the story that is contained in the Bible, for a long time there are no laws. There's no moral or ethical compass. The goodness of God, which was placed in humanity, without his interaction, is kind of fading from generation to generation. And death, now that it's entered, it increases. Violence increases with the increase of greed, envy, fear, selfishness, and so on. All the, the dark qualities of humanity. Now there's bloodshed. There's more death. As people are dying, you're having bodies that are decaying, creating diseases. Society is breaking down. Anarchy is all around. There's no good. There's no evil. Everything is blending, and even secular history really gives credibility to how really the world was functioning back then with certain empires and evil leaders and using people and human sacrifices, child sacrifices, all kinds of things that were just part of normal culture for a lot of the world and around the globe in different nations. And man has always been searching for meaning. They've always been searching for a creator, something to make sense of it. So you'll find pagan gods, idols that are all over the globe, different cultures. Even within the stories of the Bible, it talks about different cultures and different pagan religions. They had child sacrifices. They had human sacrifices. They had virgin sacrifices. All kinds of ways to trying to appease a god that they had no idea what he was like. You had cultures that had bloodletting. They had cutting. And all these things really were complicating and endangering all of humanity. You can just imagine in a world really lacking of any kind of hygiene, any kind of human cultures on how to take care of yourself, how to quarantine, which I mentioned a couple weeks ago, that within the Bible was the first quarantine system that came in. With all the death, the disease, the violence, humans using humans for pleasure, killing, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And so in the story, in the scriptures of God from Adam, the story was handed down, and what was good was still there, but it wasn't getting handed down from generation to generation. And what we find in the movement of humanity, as documented by this one lineage in the Bible, is once in a while there would be a man that had a connection with God, a connection with that there had to be something or someone that had created this. There was a spiritual awareness every once in a while, and we'd see people like Seth, and they would be handed down to eventually Noah, which I'm going to discuss after this the next break. But humanity gets so bad, just there's no guidelines, there's no guardrails, there's nothing to really monitor what is bad. It's mine, it's what I want to do. Survival of the fittest, the things we know as an evolutionary mindset, as even animal instincts, we just go on and on and on. If we look even in our country, and how we've digressed in the last 50 years, or even all of humanity, if we look around the world, how we're kind of de-evolving as a human race. In just 50 years from when I was a young teenager and seeing what was going on and what we live in today, imagine a few hundred years without any semblance or any reality of God or any thought of God. It was like a runaway train, you know, and God is watching this I guess experiment, you could call it, in his creation of humanity, and he's watching it just get so out of hand. And there's so much death, there's so much destruction, there's so much disease, there's so many things that God never wanted in this humanity. And it gets to the point where he wants to pull the plug. This thing is just running crazy without brakes. And he knows that humanity will eventually just destroy itself. And we're probably on that same road right now of self-destruction. And so in the Bible it talks about God got to the point where man was just evil. There was virtually very little redeeming qualities left in humanity. In the book of Genesis, you know, after moving through Adam and Eve and down through generations, we come to a man named Noah. And the scriptures tell us that the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, that every intent of his thoughts, everything that was in his heart was always evil continually. And God was sorry that he had created man, just because of what we were doing to ourselves. You know, it's like you have a family and you have children, and they're just running rampant, and you're watching their lives go downhill, and because of how selfish they are and how they interact and what they do to each other, they're really killing themselves off one at a time. And that's what God is watching down the humanity that he created. And he just gets to the point where I think it's time that I should just get rid of all of them. But as fate would have it, or as God would have it, there was one man in this particular moment in history that had a connection with God. He just overcame, and he could walk through life with some semblance of righteousness, of being compassionate, being caring, loving, and so God gets to the point where he's ready to pull the plug on everything. And the Bible says, but there was a man named Noah. And we're going to talk about the story of the flood after this next commercial. But I want to end before this break. You know, documented human history in secular historical terms is really only 5,000 to 6,000 years. So documented historical humanity is pretty much close to what the Bible says. The Hebrew calendar actually right now from Adam to where we live now is the year 5779. And when you really think anything science has to say about the age of the earth, it's really speculation at best. You can't project that far into the past or that far into the future. They say 1.5 billion years. And they take certain progressions of current speed, velocity, formation on less than 6,000 years, and they attempt to project it into the future times and times over to a billion or so years. And really it's sheer lunacy. But when you refuse to believe there's a God, really it's all there is. And I mentioned a couple times on this program that George Wald, who is a science professor at Harvard, a quote that he said in the late 50s, I believe, that he doesn't believe that evolution and the Big Bang Theory can be scientifically proven, and actually there is no evidence for it. But he says he refuses to believe in God. And so he chooses to believe that which scientifically he knows is impossible, which is the occurrences of this world without God. So when we come back, I want to talk about the flood, talk about a little bit about where we go from here in this conversation of a good God and a bad word.
Hello, Wolfman. It's Friday night again. Welcome to Wolfman's Bike of Leather. I'm Kenny the Wolfman Max, and right now I'm going to bring you a brand new jacket in for the ladies. An embroidered jacket that this hasn't been out yet. This is the first time. The Flying Angel and the ever popular Brando jacket. It's been around for 100 years and will be around for 100 more. I've got hundreds and hundreds in stock. Don't forget a large selection of sunglasses. I've got all types of jewelry, ladies biker jewelry, silver rings, hundreds of men's rings. We've got it all. Everything is here, right here. Wolfman's Biker Leather, 335 Smithtown Boulevard in Ronkonkoma. My phone number is 631-578-7877. 631-578-7877. Friday night again.
Hey everybody, this is Motorcycle Mike, the personal injury lawyer. I've been riding motorcycles my entire adult life. During the course of my 30-year career as a lawyer, I've also represented countless injured motorcyclists. If you are one of them, I can be of assistance to you. Go to my website, please, motorcyclemikeesq.com. I'll always be there for you. I'm on your side when you ride.
Welcome back to the show. And when I left off, we're talking a little bit about the old Earth theory, the new Earth theory, and this is this is a question, and I guess a lot of people they look at the Bible that tells us that the Earth was created in seven days. What was a day? And there's so much debate. And so many things that people actually worry about, like if it took longer than 7 days to create this Earth, does that mean that God doesn't exist? Which is actually a pretty ignorant question. And so, talking a little bit about the flood and about time frame of humanity, and how this world became as physically corrupt, as well as the corruption of what humans are doing to each other. The scientists, they really don't give you all the information when they're trying to talk about the old Earth theory, the new Earth theory, whether there was a flood, whether there wasn't a flood. And the problem that scientists have is there are too many fossils that contradict all their assumptions. There are fossilized trees, and not like 2 or 3, but literally hundreds of fossilized trees that actually go through layers of what science says is millions and millions of years of sediment. And I don't know about any of you, but I've not seen or heard of a tree that can actually live for millions and millions of years intact. And so, when we look at the time frame of what the world says, and we look at this event called the flood, as I mentioned, God had gotten really fed up with what he saw us doing to each other, and so he decided to send a flood. And there is enormous evidence of something that could only be explained by a flood, and just fossils that are deposited all over this planet. There's multitudes of fossils of marine creatures up in the highest mountains, even Mount Everest, 29,000 feet above sea level. And scientists try to come up with some kind of speculative theories with no other evidence or conjecture how they got there. According to obviously the Bible, the world was covered with this flood. And it's the only explanation really in writing of how it possibly could have happened. And when we talk about this incident called the flood, there are dozens of religions, philosophies, even on every continent, that speak of this worldwide flood. Many cultures in Africa, in North America, it's part of the native Indian religion, the history of this ancient flood. There's faiths in India, cultures in South Africa, and several dozen near the Middle East, including obviously Israel, that describe a flood and where water came from. And so we look at this incident that God created to really recreate and reestablish and start over, so to speak. And so how did this actually happen? And what happened here is actually the major event that caused much of what is bad all around us. Where did the flood come from? Where did the water come from? When the earth was created, there was a protective cloud of moisture. We lived in more or less a tropical planet with perfect humidity, perfect temperature. And so there was a protective cloud that protected us from dangerous rays from the sun, ultraviolet rays and things that, now we have to wear sunblock and all these things that we're dealing with the ozone layer breaking down. And so what happened when God mandated the flood is that protective cloud of humidity was part of the water that came down and flooded the planet. And there was also underground streams. When you read the account, it talks about the rain coming down, the water coming up. And there was easily enough moisture when you take these two things, even scientifically looking at it, to cover the earth with water. And this water was now flooding the earth, and the water was pushing down as it went down into the ground, down into the earth, and was actually pushing up what we now see as mountains, what we now see as hills, and these things that are part of our environment. And so we see the corruption of our planet for what it was intended to be and what we really live in and exist in now. The flood was the key event that shifted everything. And now, no telling how many dead bodies from the flood, decaying, corrupting our environment. The atmosphere has shifted. The earth has shifted with water coming down and enabling earthquakes, hurricanes, national disasters. And we see that the whole experience of this planet and the whole experience of humanity was shifted because of this one major catastrophe, if you will, because God was he was tired of seeing what we did to ourselves, and started all over again. And then with the corruption of the planet, the corruption of even humanity, we see in the history and the stories of the Bible that man's lifespan decreased really relatively quickly after the flood. Adam lived roughly 930 years. Noah lived 950 years. Abraham lived 175 years. And we see that gradually from Noah to Abraham, generation to generation to generation, and I don't want to bore you with the names, but the generations from Noah down to Abraham, we see as the effect of the environment, the effect of disease and corruption, and even the gene pool from what has happened now has corrupted humanity to the point where our lifespan decreased relatively quickly over a couple of generations. And throughout this whole time, we see that God is still reaching out every once in a while. He would reach out and he would be with someone like Enoch and other historical figures in the scriptures, and how God was always there, and there was someone, somewhere, a connection. And this is where the story of God working in humanity from one person to one person to one person, down to Noah, and then through one person and one person, and all of a sudden we came down to Abraham. And so I want to end this portion of this talk on a good God and a bad world, leaving off with Abraham. You know, Abraham brought in much of what we know as being the family of God. You know, you had Abraham and his son Isaac, and then Jacob, and then the 12 tribes, and we see that's the story that we're going to follow. But right now, for this conversation of good God and a bad world, we see that in the Jewish culture, the Jewish nation, because of how God would speak into this particular people group, he handed down kosher laws, which are no more than really ancient health codes. Obviously, with no refrigeration and things back in the antiquity, in times of antiquity, food would spoil. Things would have toxins in them because of the corruption of the earth. Things that are talked about in the scriptures as kosher, as non-kosher and unclean, like pork and shellfish, just for the corruption of the earth and what had happened, they inherently had things in them that caused diseases. And so we see that outside of the Hebrew culture, that the breakdown, the vileness, the evilness, the abuse of humanity spread much quicker and grew much faster with all these pagan beliefs and these different cultures that still had no kind of guiding moral compass. And we see the story of one nation and one people that God tried to download information to help them to overcome what had happened to the world. And the Jewish nation was always the healthiest culture on earth because of that, because of the kosher laws. And we see that God has tried to give us information, and he has tried to address the concerns, quarantine systems, elimination of human waste, and so many things that are in the scriptures. And so I want to leave off there today, and hopefully I've given you some information on why this world ended up like this, and why God is still good, and why he is still watching out for us. And next week we're going to finish this talk on this, and hopefully put a nail in it and seal it, so you can have a deeper understanding of why Christians believe that God can still be good. And so I want to end with thanking our sponsors, Motorcycle Mike, Mike Levine. I want to thank Sharon Gillette, One Stitch at a Time. Also Samantha at Samantha's Little Bit of Heaven. I actually spoke there last night. We have a new sponsor that's coming on next week. Wolfam Kenny Max and his leather shop will be one of our sponsors starting next week. Again, this is Pastor Ski from the Rushing Wind Biker Church, 10 Peachtree Court in Holbrook, New York. If you're looking for a church, a place to go, just check out our church. We have services Sunday evening, 6:30, Sunday evening at 6 o'clock, Wednesdays at 6:30, and Friday Bible studies at 7:30. And so again, this is Pastor Ski from the Rushing Wind Biker Church. God bless you, and we'll see you again next week on Answers from Mars Hill.